Right, good morning, everyone. It's wonderful to have you all here this morning. My name is Asif Kazi, and on behalf of New Zealand Humanists, I have the absolute pleasure of introducing our first international speaker. Now, I think the reason why I've been given this honor is because I come from the same part of the world as our speaker, and I can pronounce her name properly. So. Ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to introduce to you Gulalai Ismail. Gulalai, Pakher Rale. It's in our language, Pashto. For those of you not familiar with Gulalai and her work, she is a human rights activist from the northwest region of Pakistan, so she is of Pashtun background. At a fairly young age, 16 to be exact, she set up the non-government organization Aware Girls with her sister. The aim of this organization was to challenge the culture of violence and oppression of women in the northwestern province of Pakistan. Now, Gulalai also set up the Seeds of Peace network in 2010. This network trains young people in human rights, political leadership, and encourages the participation of women in politics in Pakistan. Now, her network also encourages tolerance between people of different faiths. Now, Gulalai is a staunch advocate for women's rights, and she is also one of the few people in Pakistan that have really spoken out against the country's blasphemy laws and the effect that this has had on progressive speech and secular activism in Pakistan. Now, because of her activism, she has been threatened and forced to flee her home a number of times. On one occasion in 2014, 4 gunmen attempted to force their way into her home looking for her. Luckily, she wasn't there at the time. More recently, in 2017, Gulalai was accused of blasphemy, with the accuser reportedly calling for mobs to attack her for insulting religion and Pashtun culture through the work that she does. But in true Gulalai fashion, I guess, rather than backing down, in January this year, she set a precedent by seeking legal action against her accuser. And for those of you that know about Pakistan, this is actually quite a massive deal. So for her work, Gulalai received the 2014 International Humanist of the Year Award from the International Humanist and Ethical Union. In 2016, her organization, Aware Girls, was awarded the Fondation Chirac Peace Prize as well. And last year, Gulalai was awarded the Anna Politkovskaya Award for campaigning against religious extremism. Now, along with the likes of Malala Yousafzai, Gulalai is one of those bold and very brave Pashtun women who we would really benefit from listening to. So we're very lucky to have her with us today. She's going to be talking to us about how she thinks humanism can help counter violent extremism. So I'm very proud that Gulalai is from the same region of Pakistan as me. She is one of my personal heroes. So ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Gulalai Ismail.
Thank you, Kazi, for such a nice introduction. You have made me feel so good about myself. And I'm also very glad to hear my name in the correct pronunciation for the first time on International Forum. So good morning, everyone. I'm very honored to be here today in New Zealand among my global humanist family. While we gather here today to discuss the challenges that are posed by religious extremism to humanism, we do recognize that we are faced with challenges of shrinking civic spaces, threats to humanists and human rights defenders, rise of populist politics, and repressive regimes enforcing repressive laws in different parts of the world. Nonetheless, we are also in a time when the global humanist movement is growing worldwide, and there is a potential for humanism to provide a blueprint for transforming violent extremism using non-militarized, non-securitized, human rights-based approaches. While we speak about what role humanism can play in countering violent extremism, I understand that it's very important that first we talk about what is actually violent extremism, how we can counter and prevent violent extremism, and then what role humanism has to play in that countering and preventing strategies. So I wanted to start by kind of like defining it, because violent extremism is one of the biggest challenges of our time. But what is violent extremism? There is not a single global definition that encompasses all facets of violent extremism. And there isn't a single definition of the issue because the issue is very complex in itself. The contexts in which violent extremism movements are thriving are very complex and very diverse. And it also, that till today, we have not yet a definition on which everyone can agree about violent extremism. It also points out towards the issue of lack of research and less dialogue on the issue of violent extremism. When I was searching on for how violent extremism has been defined by different organizations, I couldn't come to a presentation with which I could agree. So I came up with my own, which could define it for myself. So the way I defined violent extremism is that it's a movement where a group having certain political or religious exclusionary identity believe that they can use violence to achieve their political aims. That's how I define violent extremism from my context. Some define violent extremism as the choice which individuals make to use or support violence to advance a cause based on exclusionary group identities, such as this definition has been given by the New Zealand Correction Department on their website. However, the choice to join a violent group does not happen in a vacuum. It's not that an individual make this choice out of blue in a vacuum. It's the socio-political context and broken systems failing people which set tone for people making the choice to join violent extremist groups. And we also need to recognize that violent extremism is not only the issue of global south, but it is also the issue of global north. We are witnessing a new global rise in the politics of right, global rise of the populist politics. The politics of us versus them is making use all around and bringing supremacists, fascists, and fundamentalists in the corridors of power. We know we are living in a world where instead of building bridges, the supremacists are building walls. In many parts of the world, we seem to be losing sight of the global humanist and humanitarian identity. We are observing Islamism and religious fundamentalism becoming the fastest growing movements in 21st century. These movements potentially create a space which further legitimizes violence. The politics of extremism germinates the space in which violence becomes more acceptable, in which it becomes more of a norm. If we look at the governments, the major problem governments which are combating violent extremism faces are that they have to deal not only with an individual or with some minute radicalized extremist groups, but with huge populist extremist political movements, very well rooted and supported by the clergy, well circulated through mosques, curriculum, and social media, and also sometimes educational institutes. This land us in the conversation for understanding the root causes of violent extremism. What are the push factors? What make young people making the choice of violent extremism? What make religious extremism and violent extremism thrive? Whenever I say violent extremism, I say religious extremism because I come from a context where violent extremism is religious extremism, and I recognize that it might not resonate with everyone in the room, but that's my context. According to the World Organization for Resource Development and Education, they identified 5 key pull factors, 5 factors which pull people towards extremism. They categorized it. Number one factor is ideology, belief, and values. Here comes the mentality of us versus them, and that works so successfully in different contexts around the world. It provides the justification to use violence as a political tool for excluding others and for furthering political causes, political goals. Number two are the psychological factors, such as the desire of heroism, previous traumatic experiences, and the need to be associated with a group or the need to feel empowered. Number three are political grievances that are related to human rights abuses, such as lack of justice and limited civil rights. Number four, economic grievances like poverty, unemployment, and the promise of financial incentives. Number five, social factors like marginalization and discrimination in a specific context. These are the 5 factors. However, not all factors may become the root cause in a specific context. In one context, it may be the financial incentives driving people towards extremism. It might be the lack of jobs and unemployment. In some instances, it will be the ideology, beliefs, and in some context, all these factors work together in a complex manner, creating a conducive environment where violent extremism thrives. The question then is that, how do we prevent and counter violent extremism? We all know that it is complicated. There is not one simple monolithic solution. It's not simplistic, it's complex. I propose a 3-tier holistic strategy, the strategy that we at our organization have been using. The 3-tier strategy works at primary, secondary, and tertiary level. At primary level, to counter violent extremism, we address the conducive environment, which act as a breeding ground for violence and violent ideologies. The socio-political context and vacuums which are exploited by the violent groups can be addressed by providing quality secular education, equal job opportunities, and by transforming justice. The primary level prevention is effective not only against violent extremism, but also against other social ills such as gang violence or individuals' actions of violence. Pro-war policies and pro-war economy provide greater space for violent groups to thrive. We know that war is a billion-dollar business. And in some countries like Pakistan, the war business thrive on the existence of violent terrorist groups. They are a need to sustain the economy of war. So unless and until we don't change the economy, the groups, militant and violent groups in contexts like Pakistan will continue to thrive. And therefore, we advocate for change in pro-war policies because it's key in countering extremism, and that is our humanistic principle. We do that because we derive this principle from our humanist values. Repealing repressive laws such as blasphemy laws, homophobic laws, and laws restricting civic freedoms can create an enabling environment which has lesser space for violent ideologies. Non-secular state provides breeding ground for the nourishment of religious and fundamentalist, exclusionary and groups and ideologies to thrive and to organize. While secular humanist states narrow down political and intellectual space for violent extremist ideologies and groups, therefore supporting civil society organizations and movements who are advocating for secularization of politics and secularization of political space can be effective in countering violent extremism at a primary level. And just let me remind you that primary level, it's the level of countering violent extremism, which is which addresses the conducive environment where militant and violent ideologies thrive. And if we are able to address extremism at a primary level, then we will not only be able to actually address violent extremism, but also other kinds of violence, as I said, such as gang violence or individual acts of violence. Then, at the secondary level, when it comes to countering violent extremism at a secondary level, at the secondary level of countering violent extremism, more direct and targeted approaches are adopted. It includes working directly with segments of populations who are more vulnerable to the recruitment of militant groups. These segments of populations are also known as fence sitters, as they have not yet joined the militant groups. They have not yet joined the violent extremist movements, but their risk factors are high. It includes approaching vulnerable segments through one-to-one counseling and peer education approaches, enabling people to opt for ethical values and choices. And that is where the role of humanism becomes the most important, as humanism is rooted in enabling people to make ethical choices based on human dignity, love, and rationality. Secondary level counter-violent extremism includes promoting alternative narrative of nonviolence, pluralism, and initiatives for rebuilding communities' social fabric. We keep on, in all countering violent extremism and preventing violent extremism, we keep on hearing the need of promoting an alternative narrative to counter the narratives of extremism. But what is the alternative narrative? I think humanism is the alternative narrative that we have to push for, that we have to promote, so that we can have a conducive environment based on the values of pluralism, nonviolence, and tolerance. Dialogue among people of different life stances can be the first step towards breaking the politics of otherization. At the tertiary level, prevention is more advanced. It is targeted approach towards radicalized individual or groups who may be actively committing, planning, or recruiting for a violent extremist cause. After the individuals commit criminal act, decision maker enforce laws following they enforce laws to disengage, to demobilize, and to reintegrate the individuals in the community. At the tertiary level, significant law enforcement, community, and intelligence assets must be committed to each individual extremist to ensure success. And when it comes to tertiary level, that is where the state has to play a greater role rather than civil society, because it includes transformative justice. The tertiary level protection has to be based on the principles of transformative justice. At every level of countering violent extremism, we need a multi-sectoral based approach based on local realities and developed by local actors. A collaborative, multi-sector approach to countering violent extremism enables a holistic strategy that uses multiple capabilities to counter violent extremism from different approaches. For last more than 2 decades, mostly the response of the states towards violent extremism is securitized and militarized. It's coming from a very military and security-based approach rather than a human rights-based approach, a humanistic approach, which is firing back in many instances and is feeding back into the same kind of grievances, which at first place becomes the root causes and which create the conducive environment at first place for the violent ideologies to thrive. Non-militarized approaches derived its values from humanism can be more promising in creating alternative narratives. I will talk about the approach that we have been using at Aware Girls. As Kazi had already said in my introduction about the Youth Peace Network, which previously we called Seeds of Peace Network, which has been working on preventing young people from joining militant groups. In 2007, as some of you may know that in 2007, the security situation became very bad in Pakistan when the military groups called as Taliban, Tehreek-e-Taliban Pakistan, started taking control of some parts of Pakistan. They started recruiting young people. Most of the people that these militant organizations would recruit at the local level would be young people. And we as young persons working for our community, it was very painful for us to see young people being recruited. So at Aware Girls, we decided that we won't let young people become fodder of violent extremism. So we launched Youth Peace Network to prevent them from being recruited by offering them a better path in life and to help them unleash their potential for building prosperous and peaceful communities. So while the militant organizations in 2007 were recruiting young people as militants, we started recruiting young people as peace builders. We identified 5 key factors which draw young people towards militancy in our context. The elements which had made many young people wish to go for jihad, they become our very key elements to attract them towards peace building. Our strategy to promote and counter violent extremism is 5-pronged. Number 1, militants promote one uniform worldview and reject all others as haram and wrong. We bring young people of different worldviews together and giving young people the opportunity to live the beauty of it. It is to break the process of us, us, them, bringing people together, enabling them to humanize each other. Number 2, militants cut young people off from their own indigenous identities. Identities that makes them vulnerable to, they cut people from their own indigenous identities. And by cutting them off from their own indigenous identities, they make young people vulnerable to the identity politics and to the propaganda. We help young people celebrate their indigenous cultures and history. We engage young people in community dialogues, intergenerational dialogue, and cultural dialogues, cultural activities, which help them explore their indigenous pluralistic discourse and indigenous movements of nonviolence. We have found that our indigenous culture was pluralistic, but how colonization actually ruined it. And now the culture seems to be violent and kind of like unacceptable towards diversity and tolerance. However, reconnecting them back with the indigenous cultures enable them to see the beauty of diversity. Number 3, militants make young people feel worthy through jihad. We help them feel celebrated too. And once they start realizing their worth, they start making difference in the lives of other young people. We provide them platforms and opportunities for building their own initiatives, small-scale initiatives, because research proves that small-scale local initiatives are more effective than large-scale programs in reducing violence. In the last 7 years, we have supported a range of initiatives of young people in the network, which included peace education campaigns, mediations of conflicts, and digital media campaigns, etc. Number 4, jihad offers only one kind of hero, the martyr, and only one kind of glory, the glory of war. We connect them with indigenous heroes of non-violence to teach them the glory of non-violent heroism. We support young people to the heroes in their own lives by saving lives, rebuilding communities, bringing prosperity, and building peace. We help them see heroism in goals higher than jihad. Number 5, mass communication campaigns may be effective, but we have learned that we need to engage each person individually. The socio-political context, which makes young people vulnerable to the extremism, it does matter. But we know that in that same context, most of the people don't join violent extremist groups. Only few people join violent extremist groups. So what happens? Why only few people? That is why it is important to reach out to young people individually, understand their needs, and engage with them. Relationships are key in the work that we do. Our 500 young peace builders till today have saved lives of more than 10,000 young people using these strategies. When we talk about narratives to counter extremism, it is important that rather than developing counter narratives and telling people what they already know, we should ensure that we provide opportunities of individual engagement, we empathize with young people and offer them significance. I just want to remind all of us that militant ideologies present themselves as alternative justice system. And therefore, most often, it attracts people who are marginalized and have grievances from the mainstream. Our alternative humanist narrative is narrative of human dignity, love of life, good governance, justice, and pluralism. But we have to remember how to present ourselves. How do we present our narrative to the young people, to the people who are vulnerable to extremism? 3 years back, when I went back, we used to live in our village as as children, but then we had to move out because my father was also a very brave man who was challenging extremism, and as a result, we were thrown out of our village. But 3 years back, yeah, it happened. So, but 3 years back, I went back to my village to organize young people for countering radicalization, and there I met a 14-year young boy who came to thank us for saving his life. He said that a year ago, he used to go to a local madrasa where he got inspired from his teachers who taught him jihad. And he said that he will go to jihad. But then by chance, one person from his neighborhood who just came back from our counter-radicalization workshop approached him and started engaging him in conversation. And that conversation helped him raise questions. And he said that all of a sudden I started asking myself the questions that if going to jihad is so important and duty of every Muslim, then why not the children of his jihad teachers are going for jihad? Why their own children are actually going to better schools and colleges instead? Critical thinking skills say it works. So he decided that he won't go for any jihad. And instead, he will complete his education and contribute to the economic prosperity of his community. Today, that guy, Ahmad, is an active member of the network, Youth Peace Network, and he's saving lives of other young people like him. So, we have impacted lives of young people who are at risk of radicalization, creating a pull towards peace, changing their lives and saving the lives of countless others using this strategy. You might listen that how the humanistic principles of rationality and critical thinking skills are very much at the core of the core of our program. They make the core of our countering violent extremism strategy. So while addressing violent extremism, we have to recognize the danger of a single story, the danger of a monolithic analysis. Each context is different. The pull and push factors vary across cultures and countries. One solution from one area cannot be applied on other regions. However, we can learn from each context. We can learn from all strategies. If there can be one thing common across strategies for transforming violent extremism in different contexts, that can be humanism, because humanism derives because humanism has its values such as equality, economic justice, human dignity, empathy, and reject reliance on blindly receive authority. And you can link back it to those 5 key factors that initially I discussed from one of the NGO who has come up with 5 key factors. So that is my contribution from today, and I'm open to question, answers, and conversation. Thank you.
Right, any questions for Gulalai?
Thank you. Assalamu alaikum, Mere Bain. Peace be with you, my sister. I'm really interested in your story and how you became a humanist. You know, they say the human face of jihadists is all about marginalization. I'm really interested in the human face of someone like yourself in the middle of extreme ideology, and perhaps also a comment on you on how fiqh, the restorative aspect of Islam, whereby you can interpret the Quran in modern terms and not necessarily go to immutable interpretations. So first, perhaps those 2 dual things, if you would mind answering them. Thank you so much.
Thank you for the question. My story is a very long story. So, I come from the northwest of Pakistan, from Khyber Pakhtunkhwa province. I said, I'm a Pashtun and come from a remote village of district Sawabi. When I was a young person growing up in my village, I saw discrimination against young women. I grew up seeing that how you are less worthy if you are a woman, or if you are a girl, you are less worthy. I saw that how when the birth of boys would be cherished, how boys would go to better schools, how the birth of girls will be a matter of disappointment for parents, a matter of shame for the mothers and for the parents. That was the kind of culture that I grew up. But at the same time, while I was feeling less worthy, because I was a woman, because I was a girl, I was feeling less worthy. At the same time, because my mother was the only entrepreneur in the village, she used to do embroidery using machine. That was a very unique skill back then in our village. So women from all over the villages would come to our home to kind of like ask my mother to do embroidery for them. And that was my opportunity when I would listen to the stories of women. And one thing that I found common in the stories that women would share with my mother in that home was that they were asked, the woman would be told to stay silent. Silence was a matter of heroism. If women were beaten by their husbands, and if they stay silent about it, if they just bear the abuse, they would be the best role model woman. But if they were speaking against the abuse, they would be considered like the bad women who are ruining the respect of their whole family. Like, what is the need of shouting when your husband beats? Just stay silent and save the respect of the family. That was the kind of, and that used to bother me a lot. And at the same time, it was a time period when I would see wall chalking on the walls of my village, calling for recruitment in jihad, calling for joining trainings, because there was a jihad happening in Afghanistan back then. And because there was a jihad happening in Afghanistan, I'm sorry, kind of like using the jargons, by jihad happening in Afghanistan, I mean that while the US and the Russia were fighting in Afghanistan, jihad and Islam was used as a tool to brainwash people and to train them into militancy, send them to Afghanistan to fight against Russia. So most of those recruitments and trainings were happening in Pakistan, in my own very region. So most of the recruitments, a lot of the recruitments were happening for my own neighborhood. I grew up watching television series where we would be told that how Muslims are victimized all around the world. If you come from Pakistan, you would remember that how those ads of the how Muslims in Kashmir are becoming victims and what is happening in Palestine. So the kind of narrative which was fed to me as a child was that my Muslim identity is under threat, and therefore it is my duty to go and fight against it. And I wanted to go and fight. I wanted to do jihad because that was the kind of narrative that I was fed with. But the only problem was my father. He was a peace activist, and he didn't want us to go to jihad. So we would actually go upstairs, sit in a circle, and we would pray to God that may God show straight paths to my father, so that he can let us go for jihad, you know, like in the ceremonies. And then one day I was sitting with my mother, and I was telling her that, you know, people who will go to jihad, and they can take all of their siblings to the heaven with them and stuff like that. And my father overheard me, and that was the time that he realized that he needs his peace activism inside his own home. He needs to save his own children before saving the rest of the world. And he started working with me. When he realized that his own children are actually getting indoctrinated with the very same ideology which he's fighting outside the home. So he started educating us, and he started organizing actually the components that I talk about, especially the component in which I talk about the humanization of others. It is so important. That was what my father did for me. He started organizing meetings for me with people of different ideologies and different faiths. I started meeting with free thinkers, with political activists, with feminists, with liberals, with Marxists, with everyone. And that was the time that I started humanizing others. And then finally, I met a mother whose child was taken away. You know that happened, the kind of, in madrasa what happens, children go to madrasa to read Quran, and we have always been told that God comes first, parents come later. So in those madrasas, in one of those madrasa, he got indoctrinated, and he was told that he need to go to jihad, and he does not need his parents' permission. And the mother didn't know where the son has gone. And it was after after a few months, the mother received dead body of her only son. And that was the tears in the eyes of that mother that shook me. And that was the point where I realized that, no, that's not what I want to become. I don't want to kill, and I don't want to be killed. That's my thing. And that was my point of transformation. And that's how that in that culture where oppression was normal, I became a different person, and I decided that I will do something different. And then it was also added up. It's a lot of work to become a humanist in culture like Pakistan. A lot of the credit goes to a 2-month summer leadership course, which I attended, and that was organized by human rights activists in Pakistan, and it helped us to unlearn many the norms that we learn in our society. It helped us unlearn those things, and it gave us critical thinking skills. And it was the critical thinking skills education in that course which enabled me to start questioning religion, to start questioning system, to start questioning patriarchy. So that's how, that's why I said it's a long story of how I was if it wasn't my father or hearing me talking to my mother about how I also want to go to jihad, and if I had the opportunity to listen again and again to the extremist narrative, and if there was an opportunity, I might have joined. And therefore, I believe that the opportunities that I was presented with, if we present those opportunities to other young people, we can save them. And that's why through the Youth Peace Network, we are presenting those opportunities to young people. Now, coming to your question on whether a transformative religion can help us, I think there are already so many what we do call it, like definitions and interpretations of religion that exist out there. But those who promote and the masterminds of extremist ideologies, they know how to play with it. Therefore, I think that instead of using a dogma, why to use a dogma to ask people that don't engage in violence? Let enable our young people and our children to be critical, to raise questions. And once they are critical, they will be able to prevent themselves not only from a jihadist group, but also from gang violence, also from fascist politics, also from populist politics. The world is now very complicated. Our only issue in violent extremism is not just jihad, it's also different kind of supremacies and fascism. So if people have the critical thinking skills, they will be able to make better ethical choices.
Thank you.
In your critical thinking courses and skills, I don't know if you've encountered the term, the fulcrum of rational discourse, and whether that might fit into your formula for approaching some of these ideologues. And that, by fulcrum of rational discourse, I speak of the fact that when we engage with other people in rational discourse, that we have a common understanding that if you have better reasons for convincing me that your position is better than what I have to offer, that I'm willing to change my mind, and vice versa, that we have that mutual understanding. It's a conversation stopper. That is to say, once you say, this is good or right because God said so, or because I'm a Republican, or because I believe in some kind of an ideology, it interferes with any further discourse based on life experience and observation and evidence. And it seems like that is so a common source of extremism, is where people are locked into a formulaic position for which there's no way of convincing them to the contrary. There's no criteria for falsification. What are your comments about that?
Thank you. when we work on countering violent extremism with young people, and especially with critical thinking skills, it is very important that they understand the history of extremism, how it started, and link it to the local policies. That's also part of that raising questionability, giving them the ability to raise questions, to link it with local policies and enabling them to see that who is benefiting from that system, who is benefiting from extremism. In our context, it is very much linked to the pro-war policies. As I said in Pakistan, that war is $1 million business. And in Pakistan, the $1 million business of the military, the $1 million business of security, it thrives on the presence of extremist groups. No extremist groups, no need for security money. So we need more funds in security, we need more funds for military, we need extremist organizations. So it is kind of like, it's not just linked to the ideology and that God telling them to do this and that. It is enabling young people to see the impact of the policies, to be able to do the power analysis of the issue of extremism. And once they're able to do the power analysis, they get the skill and they're able to see that actually who is getting benefit? God is getting benefit, or it's the local groups or the militaries who are getting benefit of such kind of policies. And then when it is combined with the process of humanization, once young people, I say young people because I mostly work with young people, once young people start humanizing those they have always recognized as the others, the chances that they will actually engage in violence against them are very minimal once they see them as human beings. When we did our first, we call it interfaith dialogue, but kind of like, let's call it our first interfaith dialogue, but the name was interfaith dialogue, but we actually called poets from different, who were having different identities and worldviews. So like there were poets from like Islam, who were Muslims and who were Christians and Sikhs and atheists and kind of like humanists. So we organized this kind of like poetry. It is very common in Pakistani culture. As I said, this is our indigenous culture. We do poetry sittings called as mushairas. So we did this poetry sitting having poets from different backgrounds. And whenever young people came, and in the middle of the sitting, they said that when we were coming into this room, we thought that we would actually be able to see that who is who and what is the ideology just by looking at their face. But by coming and sitting here, we have realized that we all are just similar. We are so much similar, and we are so much same. They started humanizing others. So that process of humanization, along with reasoning skills, is very important. Because countering extremism is not only about telling people that killing is bad. People who are killing, they already know killing is bad. So even if we tell them killing is bad, 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 it won't help them. We need to do something else.
Hi, you spoke of when you were young and brave. How is it that you are brave enough to speak up for what you believe in, even though you may be presented with death threats?
Sorry, can you repeat?
How are you so brave? How do you teach people to believe so much that they can counter the kind of fear that must exist when you know what could happen to you?
I think when it comes to young women from my context, most of them are brave. It's just that they haven't received the kind of opportunities that I was presented with. So I think it's not about me being brave, it's about the kind of support system that I have at my back. For example, when I received, in November, a video came out on the internet. It was a video by a young guy, and in the video he said that I'm an atheist, and because I'm an atheist, I need to be killed. He will be the first one to kill me, and he was motivating others as well. The video was becoming viral. It was receiving hundreds of comments asking him to, yes, kill me. Now, I come from a culture where women are not supposed to go to police stations. If a woman goes to police station, in our culture, it will mean she has a bad character. And then no one will marry her because she has such a bad character that she went to police station. Like, it's a very bad thing. But in that culture, like I was in Peshawar in another city, my father was in another city. My father called me and he said, you are not allowed to come back to home until you go to the police station and register an FIR against this person. How dare he threatens you. Go to the police station. So kind of like, you don't see that kind of parents and that kind of support in Pakistan, where parents actually tell you, go and take a stand for yourself. And when for 3 months the internet was full with hate against me, and they were giving me threats, it was my family who told me that you have said nothing wrong in the video. Don't be afraid, and don't take back the video. Don't say anything that I apologize for saying all these words. Or like, you are right. You have all the right to say whatever you have. Stay strong. So it's the kind of support system that I have, but I believe that most of the people, most of the young women and girls from my context, they are very brave. It's only that not most of them have the kind of support system that I have.
Well, in the question and answer session there, just a couple of quick comments on my part. I also went through the Pakistani school system, and you can talk to me and some of my friends about what it's like, but there is a real sort of rote learning and just memorize things. That's sort of the way the system is, rather than actually teaching those fundamental thinking skills, really. So when thinking is not encouraged, or actively, you know, when children ask questions, you're shut down. Any child, you know, brought up in a religious family or environment will probably ask, you know, what does God look like? And, you know, rather than answering those questions, we are told, don't even go there. You know, that's a sin. It's a sin to think like that. So when you shut children down from even asking those questions, you know, the thinking doesn't develop. Critical thinking is then something that comes way later on. And so this is just a comment around the importance of the kind of work that Gulalai is doing. Similarly, I went to Pakistan last year, and I hung out with some of my female cousins. So I just recall when we were at a younger age and we used to hang out and play together, they were, you know, full of life, full of energy and hope, and they, you know, had a sort of sparkle in their eyes. And I went back this time, just last year, and they are now mothers and wives, and under the control of their mother-in-laws. That's sort of how things work in the area that we come from. And it's quite sad to see that that spark that they used to have has been sort of, you know, extinguished to an extent. But the even sadder thing, I guess, is that now they are bringing up their own children and their own daughters, and they have a lot of children in the same sort of way of thinking. They are bringing them up, preparing them for an almost similar life. And so that was quite sad for me to see, but I guess it's fantastic to know that we have people like Gulalai who are actively working in that space to kind of break that cycle. So thank you very much, Gulalai. Would you like to make a comment?
Yes, I was, thank you, Asif, for pointing this out, as we were not discussing specifically the extremism in Pakistan, but as you have pointed out that in Pakistan, education is one of the means through which the violent extremism thrive. I spoke about policy. At the state level, we have pro-war policies. The policies promote violent extremism, but how do the policies create conducive environment for extremism? Through education, through mosques, through media propaganda, and through religious political parties. These four are the means of the state. These four means are used by the state to promote violent extremism. So thank you for...
Great, thank you very much. Thank you for all of your insightful comments. Cheers. I guess some of us have first-hand knowledge of exactly what you're up against in Pakistan, and your courage and commitment in the face of the opposition and all of the, you know, sort of personal threats that you experience. It's truly inspiring. So thank you, Gulalai, for what you do, and I hope you will carry on for a long time. Thank you for being here with us today, and ladies and gentlemen, please give it up for Gulalai Ismail.